Welcome to another lesson of Vyper for beginners, and in this lesson we're going to tackle arrays. We'll be looking at what arrays are, what fixed size arrays and dynamic arrays are, the two types of arrays in Vyper, and then we'll look at how to add or remove elements from our array using functions in Vyper, and specifically we'll touch upon the view function, which we haven't covered before. We will create a contract that stores messages in a list. We'll retrieve them using functions and keep count of the messages in a list. So let's talk first about what an array is. I got this visual from Geeks for Geeks, great website and resource for developers. And this is basically what an array looks like. The list that can hold items. Every item in the list needs to be the same data type. So they all need to be numbers or strings. And every item has an index number associated with it. What that means is an index number is a number that we can pass to our function, and it will retrieve the corresponding value. Another way I visualize arrays at the start is that it's just a list where if you would have a spreadsheet, it would be a one-column spreadsheet where each row represents the index number where that corresponds with a value. Now obviously a spreadsheet starts at 1, and in a programming language we start at 0, but the concept is the same. If I look at row number 1, it has a value of 200. If I look at row number 2, it has a value of 600. There are two types of arrays in Vyper. There are fixed size arrays and dynamic arrays. This is how you define a fixed size array. Fixed size array, we have a variable name. We need to pass a type for our array, and then how many items are stored in that array. So this array can hold a maximum of 5 items, and each item is initialized as 0. Also, arrays are by default public in Vyper. A dynamic array can vary in sizes and shrink and grow as necessary. Now the name might be a little bit misleading because you still need to pass a maximum amount of items a dynamic array can hold. But we will see as soon as we dive into our code that a dynamic array and a fixed array have different attributes, which means that they behave slightly different. This is confusing right now, don't worry. Once we dive hands into the code, it will become much more clearer. This is a basic overview of why you would pick a dynamic versus a fixed array. So a fixed array is cheaper in gas, so the flexibility that you have inside a dynamic array costs you actually more gas, which makes sense because Vyper kind of like knows what to deal with a fixed array, only 5 items in the list, versus with a dynamic, it doesn't know what data structure to deal with, what data size to deal with, because the size of the dynamic array can change. On the other hand, a fixed array is more rigid as opposed to the dynamic array being flexible. A dynamic array again is more adaptive, but a fixed array is more simple. All right, we've covered some theory. Let's just go hands-on with the code where we can see how to create fixed size arrays and dynamic arrays and how to work with them. If you want to code along, you can go to the GitHub repo and head over to lesson 2 arrays, and you can clone the GitHub repo and then follow along. I won't show you in this video how to set up your dev environment. I did that in lesson 0. So if you want to see how I set up my dev environment, you can check that out. Alternatively, you can head over to Remix, which is an online code editor where you can code along in Vyper. I'm going to head over to my terminal and open my code editor inside my terminal. I'm going to open my terminal, and the first thing that I'm going to do is create a virtual environment, activate my virtual environment. Again, if you want to see how to set up your dev environment, check out lesson 0. I'm going to install all the necessary libraries. I'm going to navigate to my ape folder. Inside my ape folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it myarray.vy. I'm going to close my terminal for now, close the sidebar for now. First thing I'm going to do is inside a Vyper contract is define the version. I'm going to use 0.3.9, and over here we're going to start by defining our fixed size array. Fixed size array, and this array will hold numbers and we'll give it a size of 5. Now let's write our first function to add to our fixed size array a number. We'll need to pass a number, and the type is uint56, and then what we're going to do is then we access the fixed size array, and then we need to pass an index number. So this one will be 0 for the first index number, for the first slot, and then we'll say the value is equal to number. Awesome, so we've written up our first function. Let's deploy our contract and interact with it. You can do this in Remix or use the script that I've created that spins up a local UI. To run it, make sure you've saved your contract, head over to your terminal and run ape, run scripts, deploy, and we're deploying on Anvil, so you can choose deploy anvil.py. Over here you can see I've got a local instance of Anvil running. If you want to do that, click on the plus button and type in Anvil, and it should spin up a local blockchain. In order to do this, you need to make sure to have installed Foundry. Again, check out the setting up dev environment video. Then I'm going to go --network, localhost on port 8545. Now this will compile my contract, but first I need to pick it. I've got 2 contracts here. One is called myarray, which is our working file, and an arrays file for your reference. Sign a transaction, unlock my account. Once it successfully finishes the script, a window should pop up, or you can click Command or Control and click on the link, and this window should pop up, which is a local UI to interact with our smart contract. So over here, we can enter a number, say 5, and then over here we can see the transaction that has gone through. Now, the problem is we don't know if our number got entered correctly or not. So let's write a function that retrieves this number at a given index. So we'll do external dev get fixed number, and then we want to retrieve the number for the first slot because we wrote to the first slot. So we give the index. So we go ahead and type self fixed size array for 0. Now this function won't actually run. And that's because we're not creating a transaction, we're just reading data from our blockchain. So this function is read-only, and in order to tell Vyper that this is a read-only function, we need to add another decorator that's called view. View functions do not create a transaction and only read data from the blockchain. In order to classify a function as a view function, we need to add the decorator view, and because we are returning a value from our function, we also need to add this syntax, which is an arrow specified by what type of data that we are returning. In later lessons, we'll dive exactly into why a view function doesn't cost gas. Right now, it's important for you to understand writing data on the blockchain costs gas. If you do not write data on the blockchain, you don't pay gas. There are other resources that you would pay for, such as an RPC URL, but we won't get into that right now. So we've added a decorator at view, but we also need to add the arrow and tell our function what we retrieve, and we retrieve a number, so uint256, because we typed it as uint256 over here. I'm gonna go ahead and save this, open my terminal, and now I need to rerun the command because we need to redeploy our contract because we adjusted the code. I'm gonna pick my array, and I got an error, and that's because in my contract, I forgot to return. So I'm gonna try it again. Pick my array, sign the contract, unlock my account, and this should spin up a new UI. Cool. So when I now enter the number 5, full transaction goes through, and over here you can see the result is 5 when I get my number. If I change to 7 and then get the number again, boom, 7. Now when we head over to our smart contract, this is very rigid. In this case, I could only write to the first slot in our array, but we have 5 slots. So what we can do is add a parameter for index, which is a uint256, and over here we can refer to index. And then we can do the same over here, say index uint256, and then we do pass here like this. Now we need to pass 2 parameters, our value and our index number. So at a given slot, it stores a value. And then when we want to go to our array, we need to pass an index number to retrieve a certain value. I'm going to go ahead to my terminal, press up arrow to run the last command, pick my array, sign, unlock my account, and I've got my new UI over here. So now we can enter a number, which is the value, let's say 5, or wait, let's retrieve the first slot first. And over here you can see it's 0. So now I'm going to change the index number of 0 to 5, execute a transaction, get it, it's 5. But I could also say the second index number, which is 1, because we start at 0, execute a transaction, get the number, and over here you can see 66. Awesome. Now let's type up a dynamic array. Dynamic size array, and then we need to pass the type, uint56, and then let's say this has a maximum amount of items of 10. Go ahead and save this. Now what we can do is just copy these functions, paste them, and then I'll change them just to dynamic over here, dynamic as well. But now I've changed my functions for my dynamic array and I can interact with them. But let's add 2 more functions that return the length of the array. So in this case, it would be a view function, external because we're calling it external, that get length, one for our fixed array, and it returns a uint256, a number, and we'll do return len function self dot fixed size array, and then copy this, paste it, change the name to dynamic, and then we have 1 function to get the length for our fixed array and 1 function to get the length of our dynamic array. Cool. Let's go back to our terminal, run the command again. I want to deploy my array, and we get an error. And this error has to do with the length function. So over here you see that Vyper is throwing an error for the length function of the fixed size array. And that is because the length of this array will always be 5 because it's a fixed size array. And here you can see the first difference between a dynamic array, where the length will be defined by how many values there are actually inside the array, versus a fixed size array, which has a fixed size of 5 items. And so when we go up over here, these 5 items are initialized as 0. Vyper says, okay, 5 items at all times, maximum. That's always the length, and they're all initialized by 0 at the start. So I'm going to close my terminal, going to delete this function, save it, deploy this contract, and interact with it. Going to choose my arrays, and I'm going to scroll down. And then over here you see add dynamic number. So let's say we want to not add the number 5 for the first slot, the transaction going through. But now if I enter the index number, this reverts. Now let's take a look of what's happening here. I'm going to enter again, you see a transaction, but if I scroll down and get the length of the dynamic array is 0. And that has to do with how we interact with a dynamic array. Let me show you. So if we go back to our code editor, over here you can see the add dynamic number. I'm going to add another function and show how we can add a number to to a dynamic array. So here you could actually see the first difference between the dynamic array and a fixed size array. The length of the dynamic array initializes 0, even though we set the max length of our dynamic array as 10. And the length function wouldn't work because Vyper says, hey, the length is always the same, which is 5. So with a dynamic array, even though we set the max position of 10, it starts out with a length of 0, which means it has no value. Now let's write a function to add a value. External dev add real dynamic number. We'll add a number type uint256, and then we're going to access our dynamic array. We're going to use a function called append, and we're going to add a number. Save this. Now the reason why this compiled and deployed, because this is valid Vyper syntax, even though this doesn't actually work to add numbers to our dynamic array. So I'm going to open my terminal, run my script again, sign the transaction, and over here I got my UI. I'm going to scroll down. First, let's get the length again. The length is 0, so we're going to add a real number. So the number we want to add for our first slot, let's say, is 5. Now if I go to length, over here you see 1. So we added a number successfully. So for the first slot, I want to see what the number is. It's 0. It's 5. Let's say we want to add another number, 10, execute it. Now our length should be 2. Awesome. And if I want to see if the number got added correctly, perfect. Now, if I would type in 2 here, it reverts. And that's because I'm trying to access the third position. Because remember, you start counting at 0. And so the function reverted because the third position doesn't exist. So let's create the third position. And now it returns a value that we passed because we have 3 items in our list. So here you can see the differences between how a fixed size array and a dynamic array works. Dynamic array initializes as a length of 0, but we need to define the max amount of items this array can hold. And a fixed size array is always 5, and so the length will always return 5, and each position is initialized with an item of 0. Now let's take a look at how you can remove an item from our list. I'm going to go ahead and delete this function. And now let's write a function to remove an item from our list. Def remove dynamic number, and then we're going to access our array, dynamic size array, and we'll use the pop method. Save this and open our terminal and deploy our contract again and see how this works. So let's add a number. So we'll do 5, and then let's do another one, it's 10. So go down, we'll see the length is 2, and if we get the length that enter index number is 5 and 1, 10. But let's say we want to remove the last element, we can do that by executing remove. So now when we run this command, it should revert because the position number 1 no longer exists and our first position is still there. So if we want to also delete our first position, we can run this function again. Now, if I run the length, you can see 0 length, and this one should revert because there is no value for the first index, and it reverted. We'll add one again, and there you can see 10. Cool. With the pop function, we can remove the last element, last item of our list. Now let's create a dynamic array with a type string. Dynamic string array type string, and we need to pass the characters, maximum amount of characters, and then the maximum amount of items. I'll type up the function at the start of the contract, and what we'll do is we'll type a function to add a message to our array. So we'll pass a parameter of the type string, and then we'll use the append method to add the message. We'll also write a function to retrieve the message. External dev get message, and then we'll need to pass an index number, and this will return string. So we say return self dynamic string array, and then we need to pass the index number. Okay, and then we'll do 2 more functions. We'll get the length of our messages list, def get length messages, and this returns a uint256 because we can get back a number. Return self, return length self dynamic string array, and then finally we'll have also a delete function which will remove our messages. Def delete message, and this will delete a message using the pop function. Cool. Let's open our terminal, run our command again, and for a smart contract, and I've got a syntax error because I forgot the colon over here. Save this. Did I forget it anywhere else? Don't think so. Let's redeploy our smart contract, and I typed it wrong. This should be uint256. Save. Try this again. My arrays. Awesome. It's going through. And over here at the top, we've got our new array we can interact with. So let's first get the length, which is 0. Let's enter a message. Vyper is awesome. Execute the message. Now get the message at the index 0. Boom. We've got Vyper is awesome as our first message. Get the length. We've got 1 message. That's correct. Let's add another one. Say really awesome. Execute, check if it got entered. It did. The length should be 2. Now let's delete the last message and execute this. It reverted because we no longer have the second position. So let's pass 0, and Vyper's awesome is still there. Awesome. We've covered quite a bit in this lesson. Pat yourself on the back, because dealing with arrays in Vyper is no easy thing, especially if you dealing with typing, such as strings, and combining it with understanding how view functions work. And that's it for this lesson. So what we've done is we've covered what are arrays, we've looked at fixed size arrays and dynamic arrays. We added and removed elements, and we specifically looked at the function type view that only reads data from the blockchain. I will see you guys in the next lesson where we are going to cover hash maps. Now go and code some Python.